It's the Jeremy Haselwood Show. What's good? What's good? Let's get ready to go. Let's go.
Welcome to the Jeremy Haselwood Show. Plug in, turn it up.
Let's go.
Hey, hey. Welcome to the Jeremy Haselwood Show. Push play, let it roll.
Let's go.
What's good? Welcome to my show. In 3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
Welcome to today's episode where we will talk all about data and analytics for nonprofits. But before we get started here, make sure that you tap, click, or smash the follow or subscribe button so that you'll be notified when each new episode drops. Today we have a very special guest. I'm going to read her bio here. I will be introducing Lori Collins. She's a thought leader and trusted advisor on analytics and research-driven strategies. She's been analyzing behaviors plus attitudes and preferences for several decades, helping to optimize multi-channel marketing communications and fundraising performance. She created the industry's first giving sciences agency practice and independent consultancy, combining the disciplines of data science and research for fundraising strategies that are truly supporter-centric, along with designing and conducting several hundred research studies across dozens of brands and causes. She has authored 2 of the longest-running tracking studies on preferred channels of engagement and charitable giving. Her research and thought leadership is published across dozens of national outlets, including Ad Age and USA Today. I'd love to introduce my guest, Lori Collins. Lori, did I miss anything? And welcome to the Jeremy Haselwood Show.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's great to be here, and I think you nailed it.
Man, I'm so excited because just your intro, the studies that you've done, the listeners are in the presence of a legend, and maybe some of them know it. If some of them know who you are, then they already know what they're about to get in this episode. But I'm excited because I have a chance just to personally get your thoughts and pick your brain a little bit here. I have a few questions, and we're just going to let this conversation go and see where we take it. So I want to talk about why people give charitably. What are the motivations? Why do people donate to nonprofits?
That is a wonderful question, Jeremy. And it's something that I've studied a lot for many years. And the beauty of tracking studies is that you can really inform where the sentiment is going. So this is an element that for years and years, why people give, why people choose to give has been so consistent right up until a few years ago when we saw that a personal responsibility to give back or tithe in the case of religious audiences surpassed other giving motivations to become the top one spot. And there's lots of opinions on this. I truly believe that it is a result of the widening wealth gap in America because the sentiment increases with age and income. And those are the folks that tend to be more well off. And they're seeing that there is this growing wealth divide, and people do feel that responsibility to give back or tithe.
There have been some changes, especially since COVID and giving trends. I know coming off of COVID, there was actually a good year in fundraising. And I believe that it's because more people were at home. People weren't spending as much money on entertainment and travel, so they have more money to give. But then post-COVID, you have recessions, so giving decreased a little bit. What kind of general trends are you seeing right now in fundraising?
Boy, there is a sea shift right now, right? Individual mass market fundraising is eroding. And it's not just post-pandemic, been a trend for the last 4 decades, according to Giving USA. And that is a sea change that I think it's brought us back to that old adage that I talked a lot about pre-pandemic, which is fewer donors giving more. So I can go over all the KPIs or key performance indicators for donor health, and it's all going to draw the same conclusions in terms of, hey, it's about eroding mass market individual giving. It's about fewer donors giving more. And what do we do about it?
So are we seeing like a counter to like fewer donors giving more? Are we seeing more donors giving less or more donors just not giving at all?
I would say it falls more in the camp of the latter. So we've got a rising number of nonprofit 501c3s. We're now up to last count 1.5 million. That is a 50% increase in the last 20 years. And so there's a lot of opportunities to give. However, my tracking studies on charitable giving show that the median number of charities supported is just 3. So there's going to be some segment differences. And of course, households with higher income, those households that have income of 250K plus, those represent about 7% of the US households. They give it a higher rate, and they have a median number of charities supported of 4. But we're still talking about a small number in that inner circle and a lot of opportunities. And with inflation being what it has, it's of course come down now. I think the latest statistics for September is that inflation is dropped to 2.4%. But when you look at the cumulative increase since pre-pandemic, the last 5 years, we're talking a 23% aggregate punch to people's wallets. And according to the Giving Sciences Barometer, about 58% of charitable donors say that absolutely they've given less as a result of inflation taking a bigger chunk of their wallet.
Yeah, it's a real thing. So you have a lot of factors coming into play, just not only economic with inflation, but even looking at, like you mentioned, just the number of nonprofits that are out there now. And if you have a household that's supporting 3 to 4 could mean $20 is supporting one, or it could mean like $1,000 for each of them. But the bottom line is there's more competition than ever. And with new nonprofits coming on board every day, it's like you're not starting out as a big nonprofit, you're starting out from scratch. So how do you fight for that space in the donors' minds? What do you think? What are some ideas? What can we do about what's happening right now?
What do we do about it is the actionable question. And I think that there are some bright spots. If you look at donor files and analysis, there are some bright spots in terms of those higher lifetime value folks. So talking about a industry standard 5-year long-term value or LTV, and you could make that net by including costs in it. That's of course going to be the gold standard, as well as ROI measures. And some of these segments have a lot of opportunities because they're higher LTV, higher ROI, and they span the donor files. On the top end, relational fundraising is going to be seeing tremendous growth simply because you've got these mid-major donors and this growing appreciated asset market, whether you're talking about wealth in the form of homes or artwork or the stock market. I mean, the stock market has increased. It's doubled in the last 5 years alone. And those that are fortunate enough to be in the stock market are sitting on some massive appreciated assets. That's why we're hearing more and more about donor advised funds and relational fundraising, because that's going to continue to absorb some of these losses in the lower levels of individual fundraising. So relational giving, big opportunity, really going to move the needle. On the lower end of the file, we've got some higher frequency folks, perhaps lower dollars, but when you add up the giving for a sustaining monthly giver, that LTV is off the charts. Whether you're looking at it net or gross, it is absolutely off the charts. And so that is another big opportunity for growth. And then, of course, across the file, I think that digital opportunities are ripe for the picking. And we're seeing an erosion of the performance of direct mail acquisition. And it's not cheap, as everyone knows. So this is an opportunity that we really need to lean into.
Yeah. And that donor acquisition, direct mail, gets more expensive every year as postal rates go up and the costs of printing and the cost of paper and everything. And I do want to talk about digital here shortly, but briefly, you are like this godmother of data. And I don't know, maybe that's going to be your new title.
I like that.
And some of your earlier work that you've done in your career was the donor graphics research. And I know you have the barometer now, and I want to dive more into that here in a few minutes. But just tell the listeners about donor graphics and what some of your key takeaways were with donor graphics.
Yeah. So donor graphics was a study that I led for 12 years, and it was unique in that it wasn't just a charitable market study. So it started at the top with US adults, and it was a representative to the census study on all of the communication elements that have been changing so rapidly over the past decade, right? So it's looking at communication factors for maybe us interpersonally as friends versus the organizations that I support charitably versus commercial organizations. So how do I prefer to get my communications from Nike or from maybe other brands that I support and shop with? So that enabled us to do a lot of comparisons for the nonprofit supporters versus the commercial side. And as we know, the nonprofit scape usually lags the commercial marketing sphere by several years. So it really enabled us to see opportunities before others did.
Okay.
So in terms of the content of it, it was a very wide-reaching study. So not only communications and preferences, but also attitudes and behaviors on giving. So it had a really wide scope.
Yeah, and you would look at things like how donors prefer, if they prefer direct mail or email and things like that, correct? Like some of those factors.
So I'd look at preferred media mix. If you could design your own media mix with the companies that you purchase from or the charitable organizations or charities that you support, what would that look like? And then for that latter audience, taking it a step further and saying, hey, what channels do you prefer to give through? And looking at the correlations and similarities there between preferred media mix and preferred method of donating.
Yeah, and what I like about that is as organizations, you do it a certain way without having any data to reference. So that study was really important and still is relevant today and understanding. If you're listening to this and you haven't reviewed the previous donor graphics, like it's a great opportunity just to give you some data points with how you can drive your strategy for connecting with donors. We're going to pause for a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about digital fundraising. We are back at the Jeremy Haselwood Show. I am sitting here with Lori Collins, data and analytics extraordinaire, the godmother of data and analytics. I'm running with it. I said it. I'm just going to run with it. I don't know if there's already one out there. If there is, I hope I'm not stepping on any toes. But it is what it is for this podcast. But I want to talk about digital fundraising because season 1 of my show is really digging into digital fundraising. And you did a good job of setting the table in general for data and analytics and some of your background and the research and laying that groundwork. I'm curious to know, one of the constant, I'll call it a debate that I have with clients is always digital versus direct mail. Should you do digital? Should we only do direct mail? And as much of a digital person as I am, I'm always like both. Like I have to give respect to where respect is due. I remember coming into this work when I first started working with nonprofits, being a digitally first person, I was really shocked at how powerful direct mail was. Because in my mind, at the time I was in my 20s, I'm like, direct mail is dead. Nobody uses direct mail because I didn't use direct mail. But when you look at the data, it's like, man, direct mail, like it's raking in money because they're really going after your donors. To some of those demographics you shared earlier, like it is an older generation that has the income to be able to donate. So they're not necessarily as digitally inclined. Now, that gap has changed over the years where you have the baby boomers and on, they are more digitally savvy, but direct mail is still where it is. So how do you what does the data say about direct mail versus digital versus doing both?
Yeah, that's a great debate and it's ongoing and it's even more in the forefront right now because, to your point, the direct mail is expensive. There's not only postage and printing costs in there, but there's declining performance in many segments such as acquisition. And so I think that The situation is that how do we combine the two in the most cost-effective manner, right? So direct mail, if you look at a donor trends report, it still brings in the majority of dollars for any program, even though we know that digital donors, they give more. They have a higher average gift. There's some elements related to the psychology of fake money, right? That when I'm online using my credit card, it doesn't count. And that's one of the factors that means that the average giving is so much higher for digital. And we've got some considerations on retention for some organizations. The digital retention is lower, reactivation, all of these factors. But when we look at the bottom line, when we're looking at either an ROI perspective or a LTV, we know that when we compare the two channels in terms of acquisition, that we typically have somewhere around a 2x increase for digital long-term value versus direct mail. There's a lot of differences and nuances by sector and age and demographics of the file. Of course, for animal welfare, they tend to skew a little bit younger, more digital. So you don't have that 2x factor for digital versus direct mail. But the bottom line is you're usually getting more donors on file through direct mail than you are digital. So it's that workhorse being direct mail, but we really need to augment that with higher long-term values, higher ROIs for digital. And let's look at the best way to put your left and right hands together. How do we combine that through different strategies such as co-targeting? So co-targeting is a great way to bolster the performance of some of these more costly channels, whether those costly channels are direct mail or telephone or direct response television or DRTV. There's a great way that we can bolster that with some online display advertising.
What are you seeing with programs that are doing both, like that performance of a digital and direct mail program versus only digital or only direct mail?
When we do controlled analyses, quantifying the value of a single channel donor versus a multi-channel donor, and let's be real, online is the backbone of that multi-channel donor status, we tend to see a 2 to 3x increase in lifetime value. So at the onset, we tend to have a 2x increase of the value of a multi-channel donor, someone giving in multiple channels versus one that for their subsequent gifts, they actually stay in their acquisition channel. And then by the time you get to that 5-year mark, you're easily talking a 3x increase in lifetime value for those folks that are giving through multiple channels, including digital.
Yeah. And what would you say to the organization who's always done direct mail and they're concerned about digital? Oh, we know what our results are. We don't know if we want to invest in digital because we don't know that unknown world of digital. We're going to stick with direct mail. What would your advice be to those organizations?
There's usually some great opportunities for testing to dip a toe, and budgets follow performance, right? So if you, as the digital strategy expert, can show some really convincing ROI for the digital channel, to me, it's the proof is in the pudding, right? We've got these performance numbers that really quickly become just a question of, how do we scale that for growth?
Yeah. And I love the way that you say, because you're a data and analytics person. So even your responses are just so data and analytics. I would just be like, just do it. If you're digital and you're not doing direct mail, or if you're direct mail rather and you're not doing digital, just do it. Just invest some money and see what will happen. That's my response. But I love yours because you get the technical and the analytical piece because you live in the data. I don't live in the data, but I understand the data and I know the trend. And it's really hard. Organizations, that fear of failure, I think. And of course, there's like this responsibility to like the board and to their donors. It's like you want to be fiscally responsible with the money that you make, but it's almost irresponsible not to test. And I think every nonprofit should embrace a concept of even having a test budget. And I really don't know any that do. There may be some, I'm sure there's plenty that do, but I don't know those nonprofits. But it's like, if you're not testing, then you're really doing a disservice to your impact, because you're not in this to make money. You're in this for impact, and you need money to make the impact, but you can't unlock more money and more generosity if you're stuck in this one mode. And to that same end, what would your advice or thoughts be to the digital only nonprofit that's, hey, you really should get into direct mail because there's an opportunity there? What would you say to those organizations? Because to me, that's a lot of the younger organizations, because they think digital is where it's at.
Exactly. And the only way, right?
Yeah.
And there are board members of charitable organizations and foundations that come into this new and say, whoa, that's a really big line item you have for direct mail. Get rid of it. Make it go purely digital.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, slow down there, slow that roll, because there are unintended consequences of both either or, right?
Yeah.
And so we really need to strike that balance and medium of having a favorable return and being good stewards of our dollars, because that is ultimately what we're all after, is to fundraise most efficiently so that we can have the most impact. And so I think that you've got a lot of digital first folks that are skewed one way, and a lot of old school fundraisers that are convinced that direct mail is the only way. And truly, we live in a mixed media world. Yeah. And this is an element where we really need to embrace that media mix that hopefully is pointing more toward digital today than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do like pointing towards, and that's worth clarifying, because that doesn't mean only digital. It just means more investment into digital. And we have seen digital make gains when you look at the overall piece of the fundraising pie. I think when I started this work, digital was maybe like 6 to 7% of overall revenue coming in. And I think it's somewhere around 20 right now. Does that sound right?
It varies by sector and average age, but I would say that it definitely ranges anywhere from 10% to 20%, and even more for those digital first, digital forward organizations. What's interesting about this, Jeremy, is that the research reveals a lot of really fun stuff. So some of those fun things are the fact that everything old is new again. And the fact that as a channel of media communication, I track the phone channel, like using our little square blocks in our pocket for more than just looking up stuff and texting, but actually using it as a telephone. And as you might surmise, it's so novel to Gen Z, the youngest of the Pew Research generations, that it's having a resurgence of, I want to talk to someone on the telephone, and I might be interested in donating that way. And 10 years ago, we found the same thing, that same novelty, if you will, for direct mail among millennials when they were younger. And it was more of a, this is something new and fun. And you could see that commercial marketing really followed suit. Instead of the value packs, you had some really slick, bigger packages that were clearly targeting millennials and younger folks that filled with mattresses and shaver offers and all of that. So you can really see these cycles for these channels come through.
Yeah, so what's old is new, and the cycle keeps going. Well, let's talk about your new baby, the Giving Sciences Barometer. Tell us what it is and what kind of data, what kind of insights does that reveal?
Yeah, so now that Giving Sciences is an independent consultancy, I looked at a new study of charitable giving, and I really liked the idea of a barometer. Right? Because back in the day when I named the donor graphic study, that was named, I think, 13 years ago when infographics were all the rage. And it was like, how do we get in on that trend? And infographics, donor graphics, it's all the same. But now I like the idea of a Giving Sciences barometer, simply because a barometer is a measurement of what is and what is to come shortly. Because I don't know about you, but I have a big problem with folks predicting charitable giving outside the near future. It's like, it just takes one little pandemic to upset the apple cart. And it takes, we know that donors are responsive to need, and with the wars and conflicts and natural disasters and increasing frequency of those, it really changes the landscape of giving. So I like the idea of a barometer to check in, say, hey, here's where we're at currently, and here's what is imminent, without being bolstered, if you will, by the belief that one can predict something that is a little hard to predict with any accuracy.
Yeah. So give some of the maybe specific metrics that if people want to go, and we'll give them the info before we leave this podcast, but what can people expect to see on here? What kind of data?
I've been doing a lot of research in terms of donor check-ins, and specifically looking at the economic outlook for fundraising. So that is looking at the statistics that I talked about earlier. 58% of charitable donors have given less in the last 12 months due to inflation taking a bigger hit from their wallet. And that is something that, as you'd imagine, over the last couple of years has increased. We had the highest level of inflation in June of 2022 when it hit 9.1%, which was something crazy like a 40-year high. And it's since gone down. But again, inflation is that cumulative impact. So another area that I look at is the belief of a pending recession. So I compare what the experts, the financial banks, believe is the risk of a pending recession. And then I compare that to US adults, 18 and older, and then to the charitable population. And right now, the charitable population, about 56% of them say, you know what, a recession feels imminent. And that's much higher than the experts. So we know that there is this divide in sentiment. And the important thing I like to look at is what to do about it. And one area that I believe is very actionable based on the Giving Sciences Barometer right now is looking at relational fundraising. So as we talked about, the S&P 500, the stock market, has doubled in the last 5-year period. So there are charitable adults that are sitting on a lot of wealth. And because this higher income segment has a higher belief, ironically, that we're going to go into a recession, and that, of course, can change with the outcome of the presidential election, et cetera, so many different factors. But they have a belief, that a higher belief, about 2/3 of them believe that the U.S. is headed toward a recession. So what that means to me as a fundraiser is that it is a prime time to have these conversations with these higher giving donors in the relational one-on-one context. And I like the idea of asking for advice. There's that old adage that's been repeated a million times that you ask for money and you get advice, ask for advice and you get money. And so I think it's a really prime time to talk with these folks that we know might have a higher wealth, and that translates to a higher participation in donor advised funds or DAFs. And it's a great time to really cash in on the market, because based on the presidential election, it's probably going to change. And a lot of folks are really expecting the market to take a bit of a correction. So why not cash out now, take some profit when things are high?
No, that's a great point. It sounds like we're entering, or we're in the season, if you will, of major donors and tapping into them. It doesn't mean not to utilize and put resources towards your other individual donors, but it does sound like that relational donor is going to be really important, setting up that for the longevity of fundraising for your nonprofit. So I think that's a really great point. Well, one thing I was going to say actually about the Giving Sciences Barometer, it sounds like it's a mix of like psychographics, economics, but also focused not from a general perspective, but really from a nonprofit sector perspective. So I can see if you're in leadership with a nonprofit that, again, it's a data point that you can utilize to help drive your fundraising strategy, as opposed to just going in and doing the same thing that you've already done. It's okay. It's January, so we know we're going to do this. It's June, so when are we going to do this? Like, you have to get off that cycle of doing the same thing and use some of these studies to help inform, and in some instances, hedge the risks that you may encounter and just make better decisions by using data that's out there. And I think a lot of times nonprofit leaders get just so inundated with the day-to-day job. As you know, many wear so many different hats that they don't take time to pause and look around and see what's available. But this study, hopefully the people listening to this will actually go and look at that. Where can people access the Giving Sciences Barometer?
Absolutely. On givingsciences.com on the Insights page. And this is freely available. It is research for the greater good. It is free data for and insights for the purpose of data-driven strategies. And this is intended to provide nonprofit organizations and social good organizations with a resource to really check in to what donors are saying, because typically there's a lot written on the performance and the behaviors, but less so much on the side of perceptions. And we know that perceptions are reality, and they're pretty powerful.
Yeah, perceptions rule the stock market. All it is the perception of what's going to happen. That's all it is, whether something happens or not, or if something does happen today, how the perception will impact the future. Like, we live in a world of perceptions. Great combo. Before we wrap up here, I'm going to take a moment and bring out the clarity cards. And you're actually the first guest on the Jeremy Haselwood Show, but each of my guests get the luxury of answering one of these clarity cards. And these are available if you want to get these, clarity-cards.com. So I'm just going to pick a card here and you can answer it. So this card says, how do you stay positive during difficult times?
How do you stay positive during difficult times? The universe is clearly giving me a tarot card reading today, telling me what I need to focus on, I'm guessing, because this is a challenge for me, Jeremy. I'll be honest. Ironically, one of my favorite quotes is from Ella Wheeler Wilcox. And she says, "It's easy enough to smile when life flows by like a song, but the man worthwhile is the one that will smile when everything goes dead wrong." And my husband will be the first one to tell you that when everything goes dead wrong, I'm not the one smiling. He is, and I appreciate that. I absolutely love that optimism, that resiliency. But honestly, I've got work to do on this. And I know from a left brain perspective that whatever you focus on multiplies, right? So you wallow in misery, you're going to get more misery. You're going to feel more of those feelings of misery, and there's a cascading event. But you're the expert here, so I would love to hear you answer this question.
Yeah, I look at this recently. My little dog passed away, so I've been sad for a little over a week now is when she passed. And it has been this kind of cloud of grief that has been coming over me. However, it's like when I think about how do I stay positive, I recognize that life is peaks and valleys. You have some really great, amazing times. If you're spending time with good friends or on vacation or just really intimate moments with the people around you that you love, you can't really get much better than that. Then on the other end, there's job loss, there's sickness, there's people that you're close to pass away. There's dogs that you love that pass away. Maybe you got a bad health diagnosis. And those instances can be really difficult to deal with. But the in between, the status quo, it's just that those lows will pass. At least the feelings will pass. So you can't bring people back, or diagnoses back, but those feelings will pass. And the good times, those will end. You're not going to be on vacation forever. You're not going to be hanging around friends and people you love forever. So you get those highs and those lows. And when it's high, you appreciate that. When it's low, you've been through things before and you have the resilience that has brought you to where you are. And you're going to make it through this one too. So that's how I would answer that question.
Growth, wisdom, right there.
Hey, it's all in the clarity cards. It's all in the clarity cards. So we're going to wrap up. If people want to contact you and either engage with you, whether to help with data analytics or get more information about your studies, what is the best way that they can do that?
Sure. Lori, Lori, at givingsciences.com is how to reach me. You can also check me out on givingsciences.com and learn more about the analytics and research products and services that we provide. And it's just a pleasure to be on your show here today, Jeremy. It's always great to see you.
Likewise. And thank you for joining, Lori. Thank you for your insights and the value that you brought to me, because I'm learning too. Like, this is for the audience, but it's really for me. Like, I'm bringing you on because I want to learn and I want to know what's happening. So thank you for that. So everybody else, thank you for tuning in to the Jeremy Haselwood Show. If you enjoyed today's show, make sure that you like or follow so you can subscribe and always stay up to date on the latest episodes when they drop. And until next time, keep following your dreams to find your purpose.